Let's say a prayer. What do you think? To get started? I'm Jacqui Lewis, and I think I know most of you, but I'm the senior minister at Middle Church, and Ruby is my mama. And we're delighted to have this conversation with you together. What about if we had if you feel comfortable, what about if we have an eyes open kind of prayer where we can acknowledge that everything we know, hi, everybody coming in, everything we know about God, we often get to know in relationship and in community, that each of us is a temple of the holy, built in the image and likeness of God. So looking at each other, we see something about who God is, right? Here we are, Holy One, in the Brady Bunch squares of which we have become accustomed, connected in these digital spaces by the miracle of zeros and ones. All of us carrying heavy burdens about our democracy, our nation, what it means to be faithful today. Help us to find inspiration from you, Lord, in this moment. Inspiration that'll take us on a journey toward healing and wellness. In your powerful name, we ask it. Amen. Ruby,
Yes.
Ruby, this is the day the Lord has made. Come on now. We shall
Let us
rejoice
rejoice and be
and be
glad in
glad
it.
in it. This is the day the Lord has made. Let
Let
us
us
rejoice
rejoice and be
and be
glad in
glad
it.
in it. So, what is there to rejoice about?
Well, tell us what's going on that we should be concerned about, and then we'll talk about what is it that we should be joyful about.
All
Lay
right.
out the territory for us, Jackie.
Okay. I'll lay out some territory. I'll lay out a little territory. I'm in a kind of theological space today, thinking about Psalm 107, which I preached about today. Thinking about how Israel is like America, how in those days the people's suffering felt directly connected to their relationship with the Holy One. They felt in their theology, they felt if they were connecting to God and worshiping God and being faithful to the beloved one who created them, that everything was going to be all right. This was their theology now. This was their theology. And so then when things didn't go well, when the crops didn't grow, when the water dried up, when the food was not in the cupboard, when the enemy came and took them to captivity, they thought, what? We must not have done the right thing. We must have really failed our God. And what's interesting in this psalm, the psalmist is like, yeah, you people, you kind of are not doing all the right things. The transgressions you've put in the world have led to tribulations. Our selfishness has led to suffering. Our greed has led to the gutting of social supports. The violence we've enacted upon ourselves and our neighbor has led to the vanquishing of civility. Warring has led to weeping. Deplorable ethics of our leaders, the ones we put in charge, has led to despair of the folks on the bottom. Oppression has a trickle down effect. Lying and cheating leaves little children orphaned. People who felt entitled left the entire community vulnerable to plague, to pestilence, to war, to devastation, to exile. And what had been a great big old nation on the national stage turned into a nothing because they stopped relating to their God and to each other. While some remnant was wealthy with the stock market booming, ha, they didn't have a stock market then, but you know what I mean. Others languished, poverty soared. The ones hired to keep the peace, Ruby, to protect the vulnerable and to keep the city safe, were corrupted by their own fear, their own uh, reckless use of power. They beat the people with their swords and sowed seeds of hatred and rage. The brown ones, the Palestinians, the Samaritans, were the most preyed upon. Their lives didn't matter, their dreams didn't matter, their hopes didn't matter. And when disease and pestilence came, they're the ones that got infected, they're the ones most affected, they're the ones who died first, they're the ones who were even more marginalized by poverty, racism, and xenophobia. Then and now, the vulnerable reap what the powerful sow. Then and now. the powerful sow and the vulnerable reap.
It's really important that you said then and now because that shows us that the assaults, the systemic oppression, state sanctioned and vigilante violence that we see playing out in the land has deep and unbroken roots in this country. And for African Americans, the right to vote has always been a contested territory for white Americans. They've always thought that black voting rights impinges upon the freedom of white America. And and this morning I saw an article where New Yorkers, wealthy New Yorkers, are arming themselves in anticipation of rioting and burning of buildings on election day. That's a code word for a war against Black Americans because we are the ones who are seen as burning down cities and rioting. It has no relation to reality. It has nothing to do with the militia, right wing militia people who tried to run Joe Biden's buses off the road. It has nothing to do with the gun toting white militia in Michigan, in Kentucky. It has nothing to do with any of that because basically all of this has to do with the savage anxiety that all white people, no matter who they are, have been taught to believe that black people are savages and that you've got to contain us. Also, I think it's really important for us to connect this moment, this time, with 1868 through the early 1900s when there were 14 massacres. I mean, 14 massacres that happened in this country over the right of black men to vote. And the most deadly massacre happened in Louisiana, in Landry Parish, Louisiana, the Opelousas Massacre, where white people literally massacred 250 black people. There were massacres in Memphis. There were massacres in New Orleans. There were massacres in Colfax, Louisiana. There were massacres in Eufaula, Alabama, all over the question of the vote. That's what we're facing. But the good part that why we rejoice today, in light of all of that, is that we woke up this morning. We have the breath of life in our bodies, and the blood runs warm in our veins, and we've survived another day to fight and to struggle, and the battle is not over. So each day we are alive with our health intact. It is a moment of grace for us to do today what we failed to do yesterday. And that's why we rejoice.
Amen. Amen. You know, one of the reasons that I was trafficking in the Psalms this week, Ruby, as liberation theologians, womanist theologians from the liberation, um, let's say, legacy, we find a lot of meaning in the Exodus story. And I find a lot of meaning in I'm going to say, the many ways and the oftentimes that God had to liberate Israel one more time again, right? Like the way that this big parting of seas and emancipation from slavery doesn't actually emancipate those people from fear or emancipate those people from human nature, emancipate them from the temptation to follow other gods, to worship the golden calf and to worship what can feel like security, to worship militarism, to worship xenophobia, to 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 visit upon the other what's been visited upon them. And it just feels to me, Ruby, like time and time again, God has to find them where they are and teach them again, what it means to be free, what it means to be revolutionary lovers. And so And so by the time you get to this Babylonian captivity, which is the context for the psalm, and they've once again, gone into battle, once again turned their back on how to be a whole and well community, and the psalmist is singing like, hey people, when we were lost, God found us. When we were hungry, God fed us. When we were embattled, God rescued us. When we were on stormy seas, God calmed the sea. Like the psalmist sings God's praises. This is the day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice. The psalmist rejoices, not because the people are consistent, but because God is. And Ruby, as a person who grew up in the South, in the bosom of Black folks theology, as a person who found their way to SNCC and the Southern Freedom Movement, can you tell us about your faith? I mean, why do you rejoice? What is your faith about in the?
I think that, first of all, I rejoice because our ancestors were spiritual geniuses who provided us a way out of the miasma of enslavement and white supremacy and white violence. And so, even as they were enduring the assaults from enslavement, they simultaneously were providing us an exit, a theological and a spiritual exit out of hell. And I think that, and I think that that's really important for us to understand the significance, because oftentimes we look at Black people through the eyes of the white gaze and we see each other through white eyes. And we feel, and yes, it's important to talk about the ways in which we've suffered, but it's also important to understand the genius of how we survived and how we thrived, and how, as the poet Sterling Brown said, how strong people kept it coming. That's not the story that we tell. We talk about our poverty, but we rarely talk about the fact that beginning in 1868, Black people began to hollow out a Black middle class in the heat of the most virulent violence, in the heat of the most legal oppression in the 20th century. We built a thriving middle class. It's not because we're classes that we say that. We say that because it shows the genius of a people who were able to make a way out of no way. That's what it meant for me to grow up in the South, to bear witness to that history, to be a part of the shaping of that history, to understand that Black people are not a monolith, not to see myself through white eyes. And so I think that Black theology and Black spirituality allows us to see ourselves in relationship to God and not in relationship to white America, which I think far too often we tend to do that.
That is such an important thing. What you just said, spiritual geniuses. People are saying, people, spiritual geniuses. So
Yes, absolute
where?
spiritual geniuses.
Tell us. Can you tell us about your mama and your daddy?
Well, my parents had different circumstances growing up. My father, let me talk about my father first, Reverend Joe Sells.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, his mother, was born, we think, 3 or 4 years after enslavement in the dawn of freedom. And she had 13 children. She was a school teacher. We don't know how she got educated, but she was a school teacher. And they were a highly literate family who lived in this sort of nest of living next door to each other. So the whole street was full of saleses. Every house on the street was a sales. So that was my father's sale. My father joined the CC camp, which was a program by Franklin Delano Roosevelt that was designed to give young men like my father a hands up. So he joined that, and then he joined the army where he became a chaplain. He went to Korea. He came back from Korea with post-traumatic stress because he should have never gone to Korea, because when they sent him, he was 46 years old. My mother, on the other hand, came from a migrant Southern family, extremely poor on on her mother's side, but on her father's side was a highly educated family. But my mother's mother died when she was 10 years old, so my mother was raised by other people, and she did not have the benefit of a family or an education. And so, but she always was very smart in school. She got skipped from the first to the fourth grade, and she could read well. So when she was 17 years old, she packed her, they were living on a farm, and she packed her bags and she left. She slipped away and she met my father. And my mother was addicted to education. I mean, there was no doubt from the time I was a child that I would not go to college. That because that was the Southern culture. And my mother was highly, highly religious, except she had come from a Pentecostal family and she decided that she wanted to be a Baptist. And that was a class thing. So that was my mother, and that's my family. My father was a brilliant, brilliant philosopher. My brothers and I would read Plato, Aristotle, and Will Durant in his library when we were 8 and 9 years old. We didn't know what we were reading, but we read it nonetheless. And so we grew up in a household of people who really were very prone towards education. And also, my mother, she was
Uh,
apt to feed every hungry person in the neighborhood.
okay.
How did that family upbringing, Ruby, get you to Lowndes County? How did that get to voting rights?
Well, first of all, as I said to you, my father came home from Korea. This is very important with post traumatic stress. But everybody in the neighborhood talked about Reverend Sales with deep reverence and deep respect. And they didn't want to believe that he had post traumatic stress. And they never made us feel badly about that. And I saw my father, no matter how far down he went with post traumatic stress, he always carried himself with an air of dignity. And it reinforced my belief that there was no place that we could go so far down that we couldn't come back up. And so that really inculcated within me a spirit of resistance, a model of endurance, and a commitment to human dignity. Because I saw my father suffer. I saw him have flashbacks about the war. Yet he never allowed himself to be broken. And even as he wrestled with those demons, he kept his eyes watching God. So that was mine. And they were highly political. My father talked to us about World War II. He talked with us about the Yalta Conference. He talked with us about pork chop hill. And these are things I grew up hearing as a child. So I was prone to intellectual discourse, and I was also prone to political analysis. And that led me to Alabama. And I was by nature very rebellious. And my mother did not break my spirit. She allowed, even when she discovered that I was dealing with my identity in terms of my sexual identity. Even then, she did not try to break my spirit. She didn't like it, but she didn't try to break my spirit. And nor was I confined to feminine roles. I was allowed to be fluid in my sexuality. And I literally wore my father's belts and his socks and my mother's high heel shoes.
I love that, Ruby.
And that was the life that I had in the South.
So we're rejoicing and being glad in the day that God has made at a time when young people are feeling all kinds of ways. Some of them are on the call. I'm old, but young people are feeling all kinds of ways about whether they can have a voice, whether their vote matters, whether they can be safe in this nation. Ruby, what are we saying to young people about how you turned into an activist? Uh, Faith
Well,
background. Yeah, talk about that.
first of all, it's not about me, it's about a community.
Yeah,
It's really reminding young people that activism is not individualism, that without the growth of a grassroots movement, you cannot have authentic activism. It's not about one person, it's not about icons. It's about developing options and opportunities for community members to find their voice. And so when you look at the Southern Freedom Movement, known as the Civil Rights Movement, what made it a radical departure was that for the first time in a long time, ordinary people who could not read or write had access to the public microphone. For the first time in Baptist history, Black women like Fannie Hamer would stand up in the pulpit and preach. And that was really revolutionary and radical in the Black Baptist Church, that Black women would actually stand up and interpret the meaning of Scripture and preach to the congregation about freedom. And so I think that what we have to begin to understand, what is a movement? What is activism? And is it see, activism is a word that comes from Saul Alinsky. Black people do not see ourselves as activists because activists does not say, it does not connect you with with what kind of struggle you're involved in. We call ourselves freedom fighters because for Black people, the question had always been a question of freedom. From the moment we were captured and enslaved and brought over to this country, freedom was a major issue for Black people. White people always saw Black freedom as a threat to white freedom. So our struggle in this country, from Harriet Tubman to Frederick Douglass to the rebellions on the slave ships, all of those were freedom movements of people struggling to be free, not for civil rights, but for freedom. And so I think that what I would say to young people today, welcome to the world of being Black in a white supremacist world. What you're enduring is some of the same things that your elders endure. Because Black people who are seniors and who are elders, we also endure major assaults in the medical industrial complex based on our race. We experience poverty at higher rates. We experience invisibility at higher rates. And so it is problematic when we think that young people are doing, they might be having different issues in some ways, but in other ways, we all bear the stigma of Blackness in a white supremacist world. And that's what makes us a national community. So it's important for us to see what young people are enduring, but it's also important for young people to understand that I'm Black and although I'm older, it does not mean that I'm exempt from racism. So the question is, we must begin to develop an analysis that's intergenerational and transgenerational.
That's really important, Ruby. So, Ruby, it's November 1st, and the election is, in 2 days. And people are here because they want to imagine what you want to say to us from your front porch about why we have to vote. Why is voting a spiritual act, Ruby? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, voting is a spiritual act because it reaffirms our relevance in God's creation. It reaffirms the fact that we are co-participants in shaping creation, and the vote is a act that reaffirms that we are significant to the shaping of democracy, that we are significant to God's creation. Voting is simply one victory. The larger victory is freedom.
Mhm.
And when we think that voting is the answer and that it solves all the problems, we really don't understand the meaning of what it means to vote. Voting gives you the opportunity, gives you the a safety net to plan to fight another day without being killed. It gives you the safety net of policies that will help you move forward the freedom struggle. The power is not in the hands of politicians with the vote. The power is in the hands of the people. And there are no big daddies or big mamas, politicians who are going to come and rescue us. It is the vote is our instrument of power. And so I think that it's really important for us to understand that voting reflects our inner lives. What I mean by that is our inner consciousness, who we are, our values, what we think about the world. And the voting is also an outward manifestation of our inner thoughts, our inner values. And that's why I say it's spiritual.
Thank you, Ruby. Ruby, do you think that you and I are in deep relationships with people who are not black? Best friends with Nancy, the best friends with John Janka. What's up with white people, Ruby? I mean,
What's what?
what's up with white people? Sorry.
Well, I think that
What's
what's
up
up
with
with
white
white
people?
people, I think what's up with white people is what's really up with all of us in
Yeah,
very different ways.
same here.
Because white people are marked by whiteness. None of us are above the culture. And I think that from the time white people are born, from the womb to the tomb, they're indoctrinated in a culture of fear, a culture of violence, and a culture of, how would I say this? Outrage, rage, anger, aggression. I mean, can you imagine being taught to hate somebody whom you don't even know? How do you hate an abstraction? I mean, that's really quite fascinating to me. If I went to a therapist and said, I hate the man down the street, and he says, do you know the man down the street? And I say, no, but he's done all these things to me, and he's going to do this to me. The therapist would put me down as a paranoid schizophrenic. That's how crazy it is. And so I think, and I also think that if we're going to be honest, that Black people also internalize whiteness.
Yes.
And so the question is, how is it that we began to deal with the infestation of whiteness in all of our lives? Because part of why we're here as a people is that we misunderstood the direction, the meaning of the movement. The movement was not fault for us to leave our communities and go in droves to live in white communities. The movement was not fought for us to leave our institutions bare and declining while we went and populated and grow white institutions. The movement was not fought to perpetuate cultural genocide where we put our children in public schools where 80% of the teachers were white and young Black people had no connections and no relationships to older Black people. And the United Nations says that when young people are separated from the older members of their community, that is cultural genocide. And so that we have to ask ourselves, we began to believe that all of the benefits that we receive come from white America, from the power structure. We forgot to keep our eyes watching God. And we became an idolatrous people who bowed down at the altar of whiteness, who began to worship our titles, who began to worship our things, and who began to worship materialism. And we forgot why we had started on the journey
Yeah.
and where we were trying to get. And we began to believe that the mountaintop was a place, was a status, was a position, but the mountaintop was a higher level of consciousness where we began to see each other and God in clearer ways and more meaningful and more authentic ways. It was the same mountaintop consciousness that Moses uh, saw. And so it's our own misunderstanding and the misinterpretation that we allowed historians and some Black intellectuals to reduce the struggle to a civil rights struggle. And no matter how many times I tell people that it was a freedom struggle that was connected to Sojourner Truth's freedom struggle, to Harriet Tubman's freedom struggle, that freedom had always been the cry for Black people in this country, that we were not just for civil rights, we were also for the right to exist in this country with human dignity, the right to be able to engage in many aspects of human existence. It was not just to be able to walk down the street on the sidewalk without having to drop your head when you met a white person. It was more than a civil rights movement. It's the right to make an equal wage and not work on plantations for other people. It was a more developed and more meaningful struggle. But yet, no matter how many times I say to people it was more than the civil rights movement, they people still say civil rights. And once you say civil rights, you shift the power away from the people, because in freedom movements, the power is in the hands of the people. But in civil rights, you shift the power to politicians to give your rights.
Hmm.
And so it really is. And then people say, well, Ruby, you were a part of the movement. And then I tell them what the movement was about, and they still say civil rights. It's so amazing to me that we don't understand that from the time that Black people were held captives, that freedom was our constant cry. And not only was freedom our constant cry, but Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is more than just about contemporary state sanctioned murder. It is the cry that Black people uttered when white people tried to make us property during enslavement. It is the cry that Black people uttered on those slave ships. It is the cry that Black women uttered when they were being raped by enslavers. It is the cry that Black folk, that it's been the freedom cry
Yeah.
of Black people from the moment that we encountered Europeans. Black Lives Matter.
Lives
And
matter.
so until we understand all of this, we reduce our movement, we fragment the continuum of our movement, and we also disconnect our struggle from that of generational struggles.
Yeah. Maybe that's just so rich, beautiful, true. People are writing amazing things in the comments. Just looking at what Susan's saying about um, the toxicity of the message of inferiority being so, right, so largely located in our soul. I'm paraphrasing what Susan writing, that like you can't take in, you couldn't inhale. The movement couldn't fully get us loving ourselves, is one comment. That civil rights put this in a box that's like rights that can be given and rights that can be taken away, as opposed to a healing, right?
Freedom, which is yours to have, and it can't be, yes.
Right.
And so, yes, it's really important to make that distinction.
Yeah. One of the things that we have a chance to do today, Ruby, that we don't usually have is to just talk with, have a few people also put their voices in the conversation because our room is kind of intimate. So I want to just see if I'm in the chat. I want to see, like Susan, I want to see if you want to say more about your comment there, and maybe also Chris. Let's just start there and then see if there's other who want to jump in. Does that sound good? Does that sound okay, Ruby?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Hi, Susan Smith.
Hi, how are you? I was just real taken with what you said, Ruby, about how everybody wants to talk about civil rights and how the movement, I don't remember exactly what you said, but my response is that the movement could not make us as Black people love ourselves. It just couldn't do it. It could, we had moments of happiness, I guess, because we could, go to restaurants and stores and all that. But at the end of the day, we were still struggling with the image of us that had been given to us by this colonial system. And to this day, I don't think we haven't gotten rid of it. And it's easy to put the civil rights thing. We can do that. We can say, so white people or whomever can say we were good because we let them, go to the lunch counters and we let them do so and so. And that's easy, that's in a box. But when you start talking about the whole spiritual thing and what systemic racism has done to our spirits, people are going to deal with that. So when you said that, that just set off a bell in my head.
Thank you, Susan.
Well, first of all, Susan, I appreciate the comment. Let me just say this: movements are dynamic. They predicate themselves on small and big victories. And so it is naive to think that one movement can solve 500 years of toxicity and buildup, first of all. But it's also problematic when you don't understand that there's a victory between being able to have to urinate in bushes because you can't go to the bathroom, or being able to drink out of a water fountain when you're thirsty and you're a child, and not being able to do that. These were incredible victories.
Mhm.
If you don't understand those victories, then you really don't appreciate the struggle. it is important to understand, first of all, that the movement was a spiritual struggle. It was designed to rearrange our relationship with God, each other, and all aspects of creation. How do you think that Black kids face dogs
And
without
fire hoses.
German shepherds? How do you think that Black people face charging horses? How do you think those were instruments of torture? We
Mhm.
were tortured. Black children were tortured during the Southern Freedom Movement. How
Mhm.
is it that we endured that? How is it that they did not run away afraid? They did it because of that spirituality that I talk about, that soul force. And so that we don't understand that that soul force was a weapon, was more powerful than all of the king's weapons, and that we brought down an empire without firing a shot. That's really important. If you don't get that, then you don't understand the major accomplishments of a. These were peasants, for God's sake. They were farmers. They were ordinary Black people from places like Jemison, Alabama, Tuskegee, Alabama, Selma, Alabama, Jackson. They were peasants, for God's sake. This was not a movement of highly educated Black folk at the end of the day. It was a movement of students and peasants and some
So,
preachers.
so Ruby, what is it? I mean, I just want to kind of go, so what is that? What is that resilience? What is it that kept those kids marching in the midst of the dogs and the fire hoses? What is
It was
that?
the soul force that we had inherited that had been passed on by our grandparents or by our parents. You see, what Black people said is, look, I can't control the outside world, but you will not invade my spiritual, you will not invade my inner life. Black people sealed off our inner life because they knew that what did it mean to gain the world and lose your soul?
Yes.
So they protected their soul from the encroachment of whiteness. We did not do that after the movement. And let me just say something about people who fought in that movement. No soldier can stay on the battlefield for 50 years without having relief troops. That generation had done their job. They had to stabilize this white supremacy. The problem was not that they didn't do their jobs. The problem was that we had no relief troops coming in to carry the struggle further. People thought that it was about getting PhDs. People thought it was about cars. People thought it was about materialism. And the whole spiritual element of climbing up just a little bit higher, just a little bit closer to the mountaintop. All of that was forgotten. And we saw the movement as a movement towards acquisition and things. And
Thank you.
so, and so, and that's it's not that I'm opposed to degrees. That's not my problem. Because I have degrees. That's not my problem. What I'm opposed to is the ways in which we think that degrees make us who we are. Because what then does that mean for our relatives or other Black people who don't have degrees? Are they less than who we are? And I'm opposed to letting having degrees be the essence and the expression of who we are as people. And I believe that Black people have become too addicted to the opiates of empirism. It's a real contradiction to critique society and then turn around and glorify glorifying their degrees. That is a major contradiction.
Yeah.
And that's why I say these things, not because I'm trying to put down people with degrees, not because I don't think that it's important to be educated. I came from a family, that I said, that was deeply, deeply moved by education, but they were not moved by degrees. They did not believe, because I don't know what to do with that, because then I have to indict my own grandmother who was not as educated as I am. So I think that we've got to look at the ways in which we enjoyed these perks that we got from the movement and how it is we turned around and developed an elite rather than push forward the grassroots community.
It's like there was a bait and switch, right, Ruby? What we were looking after was freedom, but what we got was the trappings of capitalism. What
Well,
we
we existed in the wilderness.
Right. Right.
We began to worship the golden calf.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And it's almost, it's like, who in the world in God's beloved community, why would there be a first lady? Why would anybody be first over anybody?
Are you
That's
talking
not
about,
what God's kingdom is about. It's not creating first ladies and second ladies and third ladies. It's creating sisters and brothers, equal people. If you're gonna have classism or that kind of hierarchy in God's kingdom, then why should anybody believe in it? Why should anybody see it as good news when
yeah,
it's the same thing that they experience every day of their lives? Why
yes.
in the world would we call a preacher's wife a first lady like she's the wife of a president? It's the same. It's so
And
secularized.
why would we take up extra offerings to buy them a car? But that's another talk for another time, Ruby. Another talk for
But
another.
I'm just saying that
Yeah,
all of the, and let me just finally say this before we leave,
yeah.
because I think this is very, Chris, you had a question. I'm sorry.
Ruby, finish your thought, and then we'll have Chris jump in.
And no,
Right?
I don't have a
Yes,
question.
I
I'm good.
worry. I think I said this when Trace and I were talking the other day. What does it mean to have a house full of intellectuals who are not able to translate the meaning of the journey for ordinary people and make intellectual thought functional? I've heard very few intellectuals tell us about what does it mean to live in a capitalist technocracy. But very few lives matter, and Black lives matter least of all. We're still talking about the world as if we are living in an industrialized society. We don't make a connection between the fact that human labor is becoming more and more insignificant and being replaced by technology and machinery, and that Black people are surplus because we are no longer essential to labor in this country. And that explains the rise of state sanctioned murders. That explains the lack of access to health care. That explains the high number of Black pregnant women who are dying at the birthing stool. All of that's explained because we're surplus in a society of where human labor is no longer significant and artificial intelligence is replacing human intelligence. I don't hear anyone making a connection between gentrification and the development of new ghettos in rural sites of desolation that are devoid of food, supermarkets, health hospitals, health care, transportation, jobs, and affordable housing and access to good public schools.
Yeah.
That is a recipe for a nightmare in the 21st century, where there's been a great demographic shift in this country, where whiteness is really threatened by just the sheer numbers of Black and brown people in this country.
That's
And,
right.
and so, what then is the social gospel for the 21st century that raises us up from being disposable to being essential not only to God, but to the project of democracy? Where is the theological prescription that offers a balm in Gilead for people who are irrelevant in a capitalist technocracy and a surveillance and militarized state where 30% of white men own 95% of the global wealth? That's like having a pot of soup in a family, having one orange in a family, and 15 people got to share that one orange. What's going to happen? You're going to begin to fight over that orange. And
Yeah.
I don't, and so I want a social gospel. I want a theological and intellectual prescription that explains to Black people the correlation between our suffering and the economic political system that we live in today.
Yes. Yes, Ruby. Yes. And I'm going to take a stab at like a thought uh, that is something about. I'm going to say going back to the future, and maybe I'm talking about going back to the text. I'm talking about going back to our identity that survived the Middle Passage as a people, which is that we are a God people. That we are God's people, and and where do we find, where's our kingdom of God language, our reign of God language? The social gospel being a reversion to, a regression um, to our place as agents of God building the reign of God on earth. I think that it has to happen like that for us. I think um, we've built our freedom conversation on the backs of capitalism. We've built our freedom conversation in bed with empire. We've built our Jesus in bed with empire. And I think if we're going to get to a place where we do something different as a people, a black people, a whole people, we have to really get back to Jesus, like Rabbi Jesus, Carpenter Jesus, and what the gospel really tells us that the reign of God is like. And that's going to be dismantling church stuff, that's going to be dismantling power stuff, that's going to be dismantling liturgy. All this stuff about our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus's love, blood, and righteousness. Our hope is not built on that. Our hope is built on capitalist technocracy, white supremacy masquerading as Christianity. And if we're going to do something different, we almost have to start over.
Yes, but let me just get back to this technocracy because I'm really disturbed that people do not talk about the fact that the impotence of Congress is tied into a technocracy
Mm-hmm.
where only technocrats, engineers, and scientists matter, and they shape the world.
Yeah.
And the media becomes their apparatus and
Right.
their mouthpieces. And politicians are less relevant in a technocracy where we, the people, no longer matters. I do not. We must begin to ask ourselves, what is the world that we live in? How
Yeah.
does the Trilateral Commission represent a realignment of whiteness after popular movements around the world, after the decimation of whiteness?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question, and it is 9 minutes to Wapner. So I want to say something, and I want to ask something. The thing I want to say is, has everybody on this call voted? And I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just asking.
What
Has
was the question, Jackie?
everybody on this call voted? I want to see some yeses. Has everybody's posse voted? Have your mom and them voted? Have your people voted? Did your cousin Becky vote? Did Bebe's kids vote? Like, who do you need to call that didn't vote? Write
Explain
that.
to people why we're voting, Jackie.
Write
It's
that.
just
Right. Well, I'm voting because people died so I could. I mean, I'm just going to go right there. Essential. There's that. There's the people who died so I could. Right. There's people shot, lynched, beat so I could. But also, I think voting. I think voting, Chris, doesn't solve the deeper problem, but it's the beginning of us exercising our voice and shaping what I'm going to call reign of God on earth. Like, you vote your values, you vote for love, you vote for your queer people so they can get married, you vote so that women don't get their wombs taken out of their bodies, sideways. You vote so that kids can come out and survive and not get stoned to death. You vote so that people can have enough. You vote so that there's universal health care. I mean, if we don't vote down ticket and up ticket, yes, I like it, Mickey. It's a harm reduction strategy. It's not, but I'm trying to talk about something that's a little more constructive. You get informed and you vote so you can make the culture that you can be proud of, so you can make the culture you raise your children in. You vote to construct the reality you want, or just shut up and don't whine. It's A or B. But if you want to live in a world that is just, if you want to live in a world where we have, um, you know, where the values that we believe in, healthcare, economic justice, children learning well, mass incarceration not being a certain kind of slavery, like, you vote so you can fix it. And if you don't vote, you can't fix it, and then you just are whining about it. And that to me is a waste of breath. That's my prophetic response.
let me just add on to that. I think it's very important.
Yeah.
We're not only voting for material benefits,
Can't hear you, my
we're
love.
also voting for the soul of America.
Good.
We're voting to redeem, to try to continue to upbuild democracy in a growing fascist nation. We're voting so that generations of young people, and
Yeah,
most particularly Black young people, will be alive because this country is headed towards genocide.
it
And
totally is.
we're voting to forestall the currents of genocide in this country. We're
Yeah.
voting to make sure that every person in this country enjoys human dignity. And most fundamentally, we're voting to stop a history, the brutal history of separating children of color from their parents. We rarely talk about that. We talk about, Roe versus Wade as an essential part of why it is we should be concerned as women. Yes, that's true, but what about the women who are being sterilized
Yep.
in these sites of terror? I don't hear very few women are concerned about that. And so that if you're only concerned about your own body and not the bodies of women whose ability to have children are being taken away, then your call is just narcissism and self-centered. And you're just as guilty as classism and racism as the very people whom we're trying to critique. How in the world can we talk about the right of women to control their bodies and never speak about the women who are being held in these sites of terror, who are being sterilized, and who are being raped, whose bodies are being violated on so many other levels, children in those sites of terror? What is it about us that makes it hard for us to connect with other people's suffering? That is why we need a social gospel for the 21st century. So,
Amen.
so that I, Chris, can connect my struggle as an African American woman with the struggle of women who are being held in these sites of terror.
Amen.
It's so incredibly distressing for me to see that we don't understand the horrors. We don't feel the horrors of children, 1 month old children, being snatched away from their parents and being sent someplace and being lost. We
Yeah.
don't know where these children. Very few people in this country ask where are the children, and
Yeah.
we're guilty as white people, and Black people should know better because we've been victims of this. How is it that every church in this country that's a Black church has not been in the streets asking, where are the
Where are
children?
the children?
Where are the children?
Can
And this,
empathy be taught? Yes.
I
Yep.
mean, I get really emotional about this because I think that we only are able to see ourselves and we're blind to everybody else's suffering. And we've learned, well, there was a time when my community in the South, we cared about other people's suffering. And that's why we were able to have a movement.
And that's what we need to do now, friends. And I'm just gonna like say a couple of wrap uppy things about that. Like I think that the most important work that we have right now um, before us, as people of faith and no faith, as people of moral courage, is to grow our Ubuntu muscle. Is to grow our sense of connectedness to each other's destinies, that I am connected to Mama Ruby and Cheryl, that I am connected to Lars, that your thriving is my thriving, that the philosophy of Ubuntu is a person through other persons. I am because you are. It ought to be that if there's a hungry child in Detroit, my stomach is growling. It ought to be when a mother's arms are empty because her children have been snatched, I'm weeping. It ought to be that we see our humanity as one web, interrelated and interconnected. And I am responsible for your old people. I am responsible for your well being. I am responsible for your safety. I am responsible for your thriving, for your spiritual development. That's the gospel. That's the church. And anything else is capitalism and white nationalism masquerading as church. I am responsible for you to be alive and well and thrive and function in a nation where Black lives actually matter. I'm responsible, and you are too. So when we get off the call and you've done your voting and you get ready to call Peggy or mom and them, or you're going to share this recording because Ben's going to give it to you, you're responsible to make sure that your Appalachian cousin feels responsible. And you're responsible to make sure that, Shaniqua feels responsible. All the people who feel disconnected, how do we pull them into a web, a community, a thread where they understand this and this go together or we're annihilated? That's where I'm emotional. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. I'm not trying to go back in time let's go back in time. I'm tired of lynchings, I'm tired of videos. Aren't you?
I'm tired, but this is what I would say to everybody because we've outlined the challenges that we face. But this is the good news that we're not entrapped by bad history, that by the grace of God and our own agency, we can change our lives and we can create a new story. We
Amen.
find hope in history. And so that to each of you, I would suggest that we begin at a very small level. You can't change a world when you don't understand the nature of the world. So why don't we begin by having study groups that brings in grassroots community members so that they too can find the language and understand and be able so that they can speak for themselves about their condition. I would say also that the good news is that all over this country, in very small victories, we see the people rising up and we see the shattering of a lie. No lie lives forever. And I would just hope that we will not be provoked into violence, that we will keep our eyes on the prize, and we will draw from my ancestors who knew that they just could not win with violence because they knew that they would be defeated, and they knew that even their white friends would turn against them if they were violent. So they outwitted. They were master strategists who outwitted the people who never intended for them to survive. So we have to begin to understand how to do that for people and to use our intellect to be able to be master chess players so that we win victory after victory and ultimately checkmate the empire. And we can do that. Look at the Roman Empire, look at the British Empire, look at the French Empire, all things of the past. What happened?
Jackie's gone.
I think Jacqui lost her connection.
Still here though.
Okay, well, I think we're gonna. Do we have any questions before we close out? Susan, will you close us out in a prayer?
Sure.
That's what
First off,
happens when you show up.
but thank you, Ruby, for all that. You gave me I think you gave all of us so much to just really think about and chew on. So thank you so much. Let's pray. Spirit of the living God, the God of all of us, the God who created all of us, the God who breathes God's spirit into all of us, the God who put us here on this day, we say thank you. We ask you, God, for your spirit that will continue to lift us up, to peek over the wall, to see what we have to see in order to do the work that we have to do. Let your spirit, God, be so much in us that we are not even able to sit down in saucers of despair, but we get up with spirits of determination and tenacity and do what you have equipped us to do. We love you, God, and we thank you. We thank you for Ruby. We thank you for Jacqui. And we thank you for being with each other in that web that Dr. Jacqui talked about. Thank you, God. Help us to grow, to have grown from this, not to just have sit and listened, but to have grown and become a little closer to what you created us all to be. And let the people of God say amen.